All right, what's going on, everyone? So today we're going to take a look at a couple unique videos that Hamas just put out this last week. One showing an anti-tank guided missile, or ATGM, strike against Israeli forces, and another where they're emplacing a deep-buried IED underneath the street in Rafah to target an Israeli column. We're also going to look at a few statements recently put out by the IDF that are interesting. If you kind of read between the lines, they're saying things that they haven't really said before, so it's worth talking about that. And then we'll check in on the Houthis down in Yemen, who once again targeted a commercial vessel and yesterday put out the specs of their new unmanned or sometimes manned surface vessel, USV. Now, starting out with the footage, I'm going to link the videos, the full videos, in the description below if you want to check those out in their entirety. I am going to edit them a little bit in that I'm not going to show the detonation, the impact, the explosion. It's a personal choice, and I've talked about this in previous videos. I don't like to show the moment that somebody's life might be taken. It has nothing to do with a specific side in a conflict or a type of conflict, anything like that. I don't like to show that specific time and highlight it in these videos. If you want to see them in their entirety, again, the full videos as released on the various Telegram channels are linked in the description below. Now, starting out with this first ATGM strike, this is interesting because I think it's either the first or definitely one of the first videos we have of Hamas using anti-tank guided missiles in this war. Now, we've known that they've had that capability. I did hear some people say that there were a couple instances early, right after October 7th. I haven't seen those come back up, so not entirely clear, but there's a couple big takeaways here. First, this looks an awful lot like the Chinese Red Arrow HJ-8, which is a wire-guided ATGM with a range out to about 4,000 meters or 4 kilometers. And we'll talk about the difference, the pros and cons, really, of a wire-guided munition here in a second. You'll see the operator lines up the target, fires this missile, and the positive of a wire-guided munition is that there is a physical wire attached to that munition back to the terminal until it strikes its target. So yes, there could be usually there's more than 4,000 meters of wire spooled up inside of that missile that's coming out the back end. It's there. Yes, that can get caught on things at times, a tree, a power line, anything, or it could just be a bad wire and break. And we've seen that actually play out in especially in Ukraine when they're trying to engage targets at longer distances. And just past the max range, all of a sudden that missile just kind of veers off into no man's land and goes anywhere, right? So this looks like it's well within the 4,000 meter range. The positive for a wire guided munition is that it's very hard for enemy forces to jam or confuse the missile system when it's being guided by a wire. There's somebody sitting behind the terminal steering the missile onto the target, which is a lot easier said than done. The downside to this type of weapon system is that you have to stay behind the terminal until it impacts the target. So something like the Javelin or the NLAW, you can fire and leave and get out of that location. So by the time it impacts the target, you're no longer where you fired it from. It's not the case with this. The U.S. tow system is similar in that it's wire guided, and you have to stay at the terminal and guide it into its target, exposing yourself for even longer against enemy forces. Now, again, the full video is linked in the description below. I did cut it out at point of impact. As you watch through this video, you'll see there's definitely an explosion. There's definitely an impact. I've seen arguments both directions that it was most certainly the Israeli trophy system that kind of the active protection system that shoots down incoming munitions, and others say that clearly didn't work because the vehicle's on fire, and as the video goes on, you can see that it's burning, certainly. So it looks to me like an impact. It's hard to think that if the trophy system worked, the vehicle would still somehow be caught on fire, but either way, that's this video here, and I do want to call out the notable piece of an ATGM being used in Rafah when we really haven't seen that elsewhere across the battlefield. So far in Rafah, we've not only seen now ATGMs, but multiple occasions where Hamas has put out statements saying that they have been using, and videos showing the use of surface-to-air missiles. We have seen that throughout the rest of Gaza a little bit. Like, it's not the first time it showed up in Rafah recently. But it's interesting when you think about it, that some of these larger, more sophisticated, more advanced, more limited quantity weapon systems are showing up as Israel kind of closes this noose around Rafah. So, take that into consideration as this fight continues. Now, the second clip I want to show here, again released by Hamas, shows that they buried a IED deep underground in an intersection where Israeli forces are traveling. They start out the video by showing, this footage of monitoring this intersection, saying we were watching Israeli forces move back and forth for days, maybe even weeks on end. So they identified the location. It looks like they went into a house nearby and started tunneling. Honestly, it's impressive how quickly they've done this before, right? Turns out Hamas knows a thing or two about tunneling. And very quickly, of course, we have no idea if this video is a matter of a few days or a few weeks, whatever it might be. But either way, they're making pretty quick progress with what looks like just a bucket and a shovel. And what they're doing is they're building a deep tunnel that goes underneath the road where the Israeli forces are traveling. So this doesn't need to be all that big. This isn't something that's going to be moving vehicles or large weapons or even men back and forth through. They're simply trying to dig a location where they can place an IED or an improvised explosive device that you start seeing put together here. Looks like a series of anti-tank mines, at least 3 of them layered on top of one another, connected with det cord, kind of packaged together, laid underneath the road, and then detonated when Israeli forces drive over it. So you see they're moving this down beneath. Guys are crawling underneath to emplace this thing. And there's a couple things I wanted to talk about with this. They, again, are going to show the footage of the detonation. It goes off right underneath an Israeli vehicle. From this footage, it looks an awful lot like that vehicle is at the very least pretty significantly damaged, if not destroyed. But some things that are interesting with this deep buried IED issue, and it's something that we at times dealt with in Iraq and Afghanistan as well. For the Israeli vehicles traveling along the road, which, at baseline, you don't want to be traveling up and down a road and become predictable, use the same route over and over again, because this type of thing can happen, right? If Israel was taking it, and I don't know the exact circumstances of this, right? But if, so let's say, for example, that Israel is using the same route every single day, 3 times a day, morning, noon, and night, it doesn't take long for enemy forces to identify that and say, well, we should just put an IED here or stage an ambush here because we know they're going to come back at some point today. I don't know exactly the details of that aspect, but if Hamas were to place an IED on the road, there's a couple key considerations. One, there's overhead assets watching this area, probably trying to prevent ambushes from taking place or IEDs from being set up. They could be killed just trying to set it up. At the very least, it's probably going to be identified, and maybe you can send an EOD asset out to interrogate that location before you move a tank over it. Second, it's very hard to put a large IED that could destroy a tank out on a road that's being monitored. Just a challenge, especially an asphalt or concrete road like this. So the deep buried IED threat is that they're able to go underneath the road, go undetected from overhead assets, and then the Israeli tanks driving through, nothing looks different. The road looks the exact same as they've driven through over just a couple hours ago, a couple minutes ago, a couple weeks ago, whatever it might be. And that IED, in this case, the triple stacked anti-tank mine, depending how far beneath the surface it is going to be more than enough to destroy the road, possibly the vehicle entirely. And even if the Israeli forces say they're skeptical of this area and they're moving, EOD teams through, counter IED teams through to sweep the area, there's a point where you're not going to be able to detect, underneath so much asphalt or underneath so much concrete, or you're not really even looking there. All right, it's a real challenge. So this has been a thing so far in Gaza. It's not new by any stretch, but I thought it was interesting that in this case, Hamas kind of highlighted their use of these deep buried IEDs. Now I want to turn over to some updates in the battlefield here, and actually got the chance yesterday or this weekend to hang out with a couple other creators, Habitual Line Crosser, Ryan Macbeth, and then Chris from Task and Purpose. And something Chris was talking about a lot that resonated was sometimes we take for granted what the entire audience knows or doesn't know, like the location of a country or the location of a town within a country. And he talked about how important he's found it to be to kind of zoom out and zoom back in to give some context. So I'm going to pay attention. That dude knows what he's talking about and try to implement some of those techniques here. So we're going to start with a map, and there's a couple key areas here that we're going to talk about today. The first is Rafah and Defense Minister Gallant. So again, starting here with all of Israel, we've got Gaza in the southwest portion. That's what we're going to be focused on today. Rafah is here in the southwest or in the southernmost portion of the Gaza Strip, and this is where the primary Israeli offensive has taken place here over the last couple weeks. And Defense Minister Gallant just went down there over the course of the last couple days, and he gave a speech, put out a statement saying the fighting here in Rafah signifies a very important thing. We are actually shutting off Hamas's air. Rafah crossing, the tunnels, the result is that they have no way of arming themselves. They have no way to equip themselves. They have no way to bring in reinforcements. They have no way to take care of casualties. We see this very well. It's probably worth keeping the map up here while looking at this. So we've got the Egyptian border here, and there's a handful of tunnels. The last I heard was at least 20 crossing from Gaza into Egypt. Those are at the very least being monitored now, and it does sound like traffic into Gaza from those tunnels is probably significantly reduced. So what Gallant is getting at here is they're really, arguably for the first time since the war began, they're squeezing Hamas where they don't have anywhere else to go. Right? If you look at other aspects of this fight, generally they started up north and they pushed south. Hamas had the ability to kind of constantly shift further and further south. Even when they were in Khan Yunis, just a little bit here north of Rafah, they could jump down into Rafah where Israeli forces weren't operating. That's changing right now. Gallant went on saying the fighting here... Gallant went on to say, contrary to the stories of some people who are in the tunnels and broadcasting to those who are in their hotels in Qatar, in practice, Hamas is being worn down. We're destroying the tunnels. We're destroying the weapons and reaching places it never dreamed we would reach at great depths below the ground. Saying that the IDF will continue and push until they reach a situation where they choke Hamas's breathing tube and do not allow it to rebuild its strength. This, he said, is the goal of the operation. Now, Rafah is kind of the focus of Israeli operations in Gaza right now, but they are still conducting raids in other portions of Gaza, especially further north. So shifting back to the map here, looking at an area in the northern portion of the Gaza Strip where there's been significant fighting amidst Israeli raids in recent days, Shajaya, right in here. Again, just like most of Gaza, dense urban terrain. Looking at a couple statements here from the IDF that I think are worth running through. They said at least 40 Hamas operatives have been killed by Israeli troops in Gaza City's Shajaya neighborhood amid a new pinpoint raid there. They say the number refers to those that the IDF was able to physically identify following battles. More terror operatives were likely killed in strikes against buildings and tunnels, it has assessed. Now, in previous assessments, that stood out, saying that these are the ones that the IDF has been able to physically verify. Now, physically verify could mean a drone overhead seeing a body on the ground that was just shooting at Israeli forces, or it could mean all the way to they conducted a strike and they put boots on the ground to walk into that building and count 1, 2, 3, 4 Hamas militants were killed in this event. I'm calling that out because we haven't really seen that before announced by Israel. That level of specificity. Generally, they'll put out something like, we carried out a raid, we killed 20 Hamas militants, and that was that. They've gone out of their way, and this isn't the first time I've seen it. I think last week or 2 weeks ago was the first time it popped up, and now we're seeing it again, where they're calling out specifically, it's not just that we estimated that number, those are the number that we were able to physically identify, to verify were killed during the course of this operation. They said they first operated in Shajaya during the initial months of the ground offensive against Hamas, announcing that it had dismantled the terror group's local battalion there in December. This is important. It last returned to the Gaza City neighborhood in April as the military shifted its operation in the Strip to intelligence-based targeting raids. They said, according to military assessments, surviving Hamas operatives in northern Gaza have been able to regroup in Shajaya as well as recruit new members to the terror group. There are two things that I feel like if Israel hasn't said them, there's been a lot of analysts talking about that. I feel like it's kind of been under the radar from Israeli officials. But the key parts there are twofold. One, Hamas is now officially regrouping, right? The recognition that Hamas is able to regroup in certain portions of Gaza after Israeli forces move through. It's happening, so may as well recognize it, right? The second piece here, and I have not seen this really discussed openly, but again, something that I think most people following this war expect is happening. They say they have been able to recruit new members into the terror group, which makes sense. That's what you see especially an insurgency-type conflict like this, where, you know, when I say insurgency, I mean there's such a significant civilian population in and around the militants. It's not hard for any number of reasons, but of course an easy one to point to is somebody's family member is killed, and all of a sudden that person goes from a neutral bystander or maybe indifferent to Hamas to all of a sudden, what can I do to support the cause? Now, amidst all of these ongoing Israeli operations, Hamas did put out a statement yesterday from their spokesperson, held a press conference, where he said a couple things that I wanted to key in on just to give you an idea of kind of what their focus is as this war continues to grind on. He said, the situation in the Gaza Strip, especially in Gaza City and the north, has become tragic and threatens the rise of thousands of martyrs due to hunger and lack of food, water, and the necessities of life as the enemy prevents the entry of aid and even targets and burns what enters it, which plunges the population and the two governments into a state of great famine. There is no safe place and does not provide the most basic necessities of life, no food, no water, no medicine. And he added that some 96% of Gaza's population face high levels of acute food insecurity. So there's a lot of things happening in Gaza right now, a lot of different directions they could go. Hamas doesn't hold a lot of in-person press conferences like this with a bunch of media and answering questions, things like that. So you got to key in on that. Like the thing that they're really focused on right now when looking at the overall war, they're really dialing into the aid is not coming in. There's a famine sweeping across Gaza. I wonder if this is partially in pushback to some reports in the last couple of weeks, kind of denying that, saying there's more trucks coming in. There does not appear to be. Some of the agencies that report that stuff and monitor famine and things like that around the world said it doesn't look like that's actually what's taking place. So I don't know if that's exactly in response to that or if this is what their focus looks to be going forward. Then turning down to Yemen, we got some news from the Houthis where just a couple days ago, they targeted another civilian vessel, this one called the Trans-World Navigator, and actually released pictures and videos showing a successful strike against that vessel. The Houthis also put out a statement kind of giving the details of this new, what they're calling the Flood Destroyer gunboat. It looks a little bit different than the Tufan 1 they put out a couple days ago, but they put out a picture with some stats here saying this is a guided attack boat with a 1,000 to 1,500 kilogram warhead. It can travel up to 45 nautical miles per hour. They say it has high destructive capacity, works in all marine conditions, and it's made in Yemen. Now, the Tufan 1 they put out a little while ago has a steering wheel, so does this one. They refer to these as kind of unmanned surface vessels. In one of the training videos, they show the guy jumping off the back after he's apparently gotten it in the right direction. That video was like an obstacle course, so it wasn't actually being detonated against anything. But it's not clear to me still what exactly the purpose is of a partially manned surface vessel. It seems like once you're in range of the vehicle of the ship, what are we doing? Like you're just jumping overboard and moving to another vessel. Why not keep it unmanned the entire time? Anyways, new Houthi equipment here, and the U.S. is continuing to strike targets all across Yemen. Just looking at the last couple days here, on June 26th, U.S. Central Command said they destroyed one Houthi radar site in Yemen. On the 27th, they destroyed a unmanned aerial system, UAS, launched into the Red Sea. On the 28th, they said they shot down seven Iranian-backed Houthi. They always throw that in there. Instead of just Houthi, it's the Iranian-backed Houthis. June 28th, they shot down 7 Houthi UAVs and destroyed one ground control station. And then on June 30th, just yesterday, they said they destroyed 3 Houthi uncrewed surface vessels in the Red Sea. So who knows? Maybe those are the Tufan 1s or this flood destroyer that they just highlighted yesterday. But that's all I got for now. Of course, if interested in any of these subjects, be sure to check out our reader-funded publication, which is called Between the Lines, linked in the description below. I'll throw a couple articles in there, linked to a couple articles in the description that you might find interesting related to some things I discussed in this video. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.